Hello, art historians, and we are back for our next section of Northern Renaissance, the art of the Northern Renaissance. You'll see that we are a little bit further along than we were the last time I saw you. We did the Merode altarpiece, which was 1427. Then we did the Adam and Eve. We did the Adam and Eve, which was for 1504, and now we're at the Isenheim altarpiece. That's how you say that, Isenheim. And again, it's an altarpiece. It folds closed and it folds open. And so that's one of our many symbols of how we know that it is a piece that is Northern European, Northern Renaissance, is because those Northern Renaissance people, they love to paint diptychs and triptychs, things that fold in and things like that. So here we have the Isenheim altarpiece. Matthias Grunwald is our artist. We have oil on wood, because remember the Northern Renaissance, we use a lot of oil. And then when you look down here, you're looking at your measurements. Central panel, that's this piece right here, this one right here that has that little boop at the top. Then the wings, these are the two side panels that fold in. And the predella, that's this bottom part right here, okay? And so when you're looking at it, this is actually the one of the inner pieces. It has three working parts to it. But before we start talking about that, I just want to talk a little bit about what this is and what we're looking at. And the reason that I want to do that is because when you look, you see this is Mary, this is the Virgin Mary, this is Christ, this is Christ. We move to, and then so what you're looking at is that's the Annunciation. And that's an important religious word, Annunciation. That's when the angel comes to Mary, and that's like our Annunciation. Merode altarpiece was the Annunciation. That's the artsy and Catholic word for what happens there when the angel comes to Mary and says, you're going to have a child. Then we look at the next piece, the angelic concerts. These are just angels singing and playing in celebration of the birth of Christ. Then we come back, Madonna and child. So here we see Mary and the baby Jesus. And then again, we see the resurrection. This is Christ coming out of the tomb. So the resurrection is after Christ is crucified and is buried in the tomb. And then on the third day, he rose again. And this is Christ in resurrection. Okay. And when we look at it down here, we see the lamentation, similar to Giotto's lamentation, which is, Mary and Mary Magdalene and John with the body of the dead Christ. So that's the first image that we see. This is when the altarpiece is in the middle position because it has three possible positions. So here are some close-ups of those. Okay. This is another one of the positions when it's open. I love this picture because it lets you really see how big this is. Okay. And so what we're looking at on this one, okay, this is what we call we call this the closed position. And we have Saint Sebastian here. He's the one that was pierced by arrows. He's considered a martyr of the faith. We have Saint Anthony here. We're going to talk about him in a minute. We have the crucifixion, so the scene of Christ on the cross. We see Mary Magdalene, John, and the sacrificial lamb. And this image at the bottom does not change, the image of Christ at the bottom. And then we see some details here we'll talk about in a minute. And then this is it in its fully open position where there are statues, and it's a little bit crazy. So St. Anthony meets with St. Paul right here, okay? Then we have St. Augustine, St. Anthony, and St. Jerome. Augustine, Anthony, and Jerome. Notice how often we're seeing St. Anthony here. And then the Temptation of St. Anthony, here we go. And the only time that this changes is that when this is fully open, it allows them to fold down this piece of the little statues at the bottom. Okay, so let's talk about what we're looking at here. And here are some close-ups of some of these things. This is a really important image, so I'm going to actually leave it here for a minute. So Where did we get the Isenheim altarpiece? So the Isenheim altarpiece is actually located at a hospital that was built by what are called the Brothers of St. Anthony. And so St. Anthony is their patron saint. And they are a group of monks that established hospitals and worked with the sick and the dying. So what do we see here? Look at all of these marks on Christ's body. So the Brothers of St. Anthony built this hospital. And in this hospital, the people were being treated for what is called St. Anthony's fire. That's what the markings at the time they called them, St. Anthony's fire, because we have a terrible fever and these horrible lesions and a skin infection. And what scientists have been able to figure out is that St. Anthony's fire is actually what we now refer to as ergot poisoning or ergotism. It comes from ergot, which can be eaten in bread and in different kinds of food. And it causes skin infections. It causes horrific fever. It causes convulsions. It causes gangrene, which is where your skin becomes so infected that literally parts of it will fall off, terrible fevered hallucinations, and eventually death. And so what you see here with, and I'm going to go back to the original image. What you see here with our original image is you see an altarpiece that was built at this church in Isenheim as a way to care for the people who were dying of ergot poisoning. And so what's really important is all of these people that were in this hospital knew for a fact that they were going to die. They knew it. There was no cure for ergot poisoning. It was a horrific, painful, awful death. Just really terrible. And so they had this altarpiece so that people could go and pray. And it was a way to sort of pray about, look, your life is really terrible and it's going to be really terrible, but don't worry about it because you're not the only one that had terrible things happening to them. And at the end, you'll be in heaven. And so that is what you're sort of looking at here. So this one is the images of Mary and Christ. Remember that, and what the job of this piece is to show, and let's look at some of these images. When we see Mary, she looks very happy. She's angelic. Christ has the rosary in his hand. And it's just this really beautiful garden scene with angels in the background. It's all very peaceful. There are angels singing here. We see Christ rising in majesty at the resurrection. So these are really positive images. To remind people that, the good things can happen to you, right? So sometimes they would see this one, right? And this was sort of the uplifting version of it. But when we're looking at it, what we have to think about is that this they would see sometimes, probably on Sundays. Okay. So once a week, they would get to see this positive sort of thing. The rest of the time, while it was at the hospital, this is the scene that they would have seen. This one right here, and that's important. This is the closed version, what we call closed. The one with Mary as the middle position, that would have been the Sunday position. And then the open position would have only been for super important events, high holy days and stuff like that. So what you're looking at here is a couple of things. Why do we have St. Anthony? Well, St. Anthony, he's the guy that, and so remember St. Anthony and St. Sebastian. And so what we're looking at is Sebastian was a martyr. He was killed for, believing in Christianity. St. Anthony was one of the early doctors of the church, and these are the brothers of St. Anthony who follow the teachings of St. Anthony and started this hospital. So that's why we have Sebastian, a martyr to the faith, dying for your faith is okay. Over on the right-hand side, St. Anthony and the teachings of taking care of others. So then we get the center section. Okay, when we're looking at the center section, there's a lot of really cool things going on in the center section. The first thing is we see Mary Magdalene worshiping at the feet of Christ, and we see the chalice for Mass that represents the blood. We see the sacrificial lamb. Remember, Jesus is the good shepherd. There is the sacrificial lamb holding the cross. This is an odd inclusion here. This is St. John the Baptist, and he's not usually in crucifixion images. It's very unusual to see St. John the Baptist in any of these, and so it's very interesting art-wise that we see St. John the Baptist. And then this is, Mary, the Mother of God, and St. John, the Apostle. And so interestingly, as we look at this, we see that Mary is dressed as a nun who would have worked at the hospital. So she's depicted here as a nun to make us think about all of the people who are, caring for others and things like that. We see all of the injuries to the body, the stabbing in the side with a sword, the dislocation of the shoulders, the crucifixion, the nailing of the feet. And so these are these horrific images about agony and suffering. Okay, why are we looking at all of these images of agony and suffering? And also think about this: when we open this, when we bring it to its next phase, and the pieces fold over, it literally you fold Christ over, and it's like his arm gets torn off when you fold him over. I mean, these are violent images, and they're not attractive. I mean, look at the injury to the hand, look at the injury to the foot, but also look at the fact that the body of the crucified Christ appears to also have ergot poisoning. So we see that he was lashed, we see that he was whipped, we see that his body is in pain, we see all of these marks, and these marks are to remind those people who are in their beds suffering the death, suffering a very slow and long and painful death. That this is, it's okay that this is going to happen to you. Think about the suffering that Christ experienced. Look at what's going on. And then, think about the fact of, look at Mary Magdalene, Mary, the Mother of God, Mary Magdalene. Here we have, this is so this is odd. This is the chalice here of the blood, and this is the cup for the host, the bread. And so when we're looking at it, the people are looking at this, and we see Christ's crucified body. We see all of the pain. This is the closed thing. This is what they would look at most of the time. But on Sundays, they see this. The crucified Christ is still down here, but on Sundays it would be opened up, and during Mass they would see all of these beautiful images of what the afterlife has waiting for them. So while it is sort of like gruesome and gross, there is also sort of this way of thinking about what waits for you in the afterlife. So yes, you're suffering now with your ergot poisoning. You are in agony as Christ was. And after you die, you can look forward to these things that will be waiting for you in the afterlife. So it seems very upsetting, but it is meant to be inspirational. It is meant to make the people who are dying of this horrific St. Anthony's fire not feel like they are alone. Okay, Christ suffered, I suffer, and at the end there will be rejoicing. And so here is that Northern Renaissance lesson. There's always a lesson. Okay, care for others. That's the lesson of St. Anthony. Be strong in your faith. The lesson of St. Sebastian. and realize that suffering ends with, in the end, the resurrection. And so this is a very Northern Renaissance kind of thing to do. So it's instructive. It's all about emotion and teaching a lesson. The average person would not have seen these. These are just about how amazing St. Anthony was in taking care of others. Okay, you really don't need to know that one. All right. This is the next piece. And this is really, 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 really super crazy, ridiculous important. 1530. Between the end of the creation of this little guy and the creation of this little guy, we have what is referred to as the Protestant Reformation. Okay. And that is why it's Lucas Cranach the Elder, Protestant Reformation. It's important. 1530, it's a woodcut. Okay, so you take a piece of wood, where there is white is where the wood is cut away, where there is black, it's where the wood is left. Everything, again, like an engraving, is done in reverse. You ink over top of the wood and then put it on paper, and the image is transferred to the paper. It's much harder to do than metal engraving, and the lines are a little more angular. It's a little harder to do rounded shapes with this. You're going to get a little bit more harsh lines. Now, let's talk about the Protestant Reformation. We got to understand this, okay? So, in 1517. Do I know if that date is going to be important? I don't know whether or not that's going to be on your test, but you should probably know it. 1517, Martin Luther, Protestant Reformation, founder of the Lutheran Church. Martin Luther comes out and says, look, the Catholic Church is completely corrupt. Selling indulgences is totally wrong. All of these rules that the Catholics have are not correct. And they're doing a lot of things that are wrong. And we need to fix this. And Luther is known for taking a list of 95 beliefs, 95 theses, and hammering it to the door at Wittenberg Cathedral. And that is the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. It's the beginning of breaking away from the Catholic Church. And Christians, they're still both Christians, but now we have to talk about, when we're talking about them, whether we're talking about Protestants or Catholics. Okay. Catholics are, the original Christians. Protestants are every other Christian non-Catholic. So Protestants are your Lutherans and your Methodists, Episcopalians, Baptists, Presbyterians, Calvinists. They're all Protestant. Okay, and there are some basic differences between the Catholics and the Protestants when we're dealing with the Mass, and when we're dealing with just their belief about church and how these things work. So what do I mean by that? Protestant churches became much more simple. The churches, the construction of the churches were more simple. That they believed that Luther believed that your faith in Jesus alone can save your soul. That's all you need. In the Protestant, early Protestant beliefs, there were only two sacraments, baptism and communion. So we didn't have all of those other things that happened there. And so in communion, and this is the real big one, in communion, in the Catholic Church, we talked about that everybody has to have a view of the altar because they believed in that concept of transubstantiation, that Catholics believe in that concept that when the Mass is said, while it doesn't look like it changes form, Catholics believe that the body and the bread and the wine turn into the body and the blood of Christ. Lutherans stopped believing in that. And they believed in the idea that the body and the blood is representational. It's not actually the body and the blood of Christ. It is it is a representation of the body and the blood. So, communion is very different. Priests in Protestant church could marry, and the churches were run by a more local authority instead of being run by the important people in Rome. One of the biggest ones, though, and I've said this, but I need to, and one more. Protestants said the Mass in their vernacular, which is the language of that country. So if you were having Protestant Mass in Germany, it would be in German. And if you were having Protestant Mass in France, it would be in French, as opposed to the Catholic Church that continued to tell the Mass only in Latin until the 1960s. And so it's really important that we realize that that we have to see how this shift in religion is then reflected in the art. And so those are sort of, I think, the basics there. And so what are you looking at? So you're looking at an artist named Lucas Cranach the Elder, who was a Protestant. I became a Protestant. He was a friend of and a follower of Martin Luther. He wanted to make a visual representation of the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. And so he called up his friend Martin Luther. Okay, there weren't phones, but you know what I mean. He called up his friend Martin Luther and he says, look, I want to make this something that people can see. Help me explain it to people. And so that's what this piece is. This is an explanation of how Protestants viewed, the difference between being a Catholic and being a Protestant. And so what are your themes here? Your themes are rebellion, because this is a whole group of people that broke away from the Roman Catholic Church and formed their own church with a totally different set of rules. So what are we looking at? So I'm hoping that as I was giving my lecture, you saw that this tree grows up right through the center, okay? And it's all like flowery and leafy and wonderful over here, and the branches are all dead over here. So this is, according to Cranach, the difference between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. Oh, one other big one. In Catholic churches, there's always a crucifix. In Protestant churches, there is always a cross, but very, very unusually a crucifix. There's almost never a crucifix in a Protestant church. I don't think I've ever seen one. I don't think they use them. And that has a lot to do with what they believe as well. So let's look at this. All right. So when we're looking at this, we're thinking that what they saw is Catholics required you to do a whole bunch of stuff. You had to follow all these laws. You had to focus on your sin. You had to worship God and Jesus and God and Mary that are all in the same. And they just believed that there were lots of rules and laws, and that Christ sits in judgment over you. And we've looked at that. We've seen them, Christ in judgment. And here we see, the skeletons chasing this person into the fires of hell, and little tiny babies are in the fires of hell. And so this has to do with the Catholic belief that if you're unbaptized, you go to hell. If you don't follow all of the 10 Commandments exactly, you go to hell. If you if you don't fear Christ in majesty, you go to hell. If you don't, and that was how the Protestants saw the Catholics at the time. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was a great deal of corruption in the Catholic Church. And so much of the Catholic Church was about, you go to hell. And why? Was because the Catholics were selling what are called indulgences. If you thought that there was a chance that you were going to go to hell, you could buy your way out of it. And the Catholic Church was incredibly corrupt. Horribly corrupt, making millions and millions of dollars and scaring people into giving them money because they were just trying to buy their way out of hell. And so at the time, this is not a terribly inaccurate way of seeing how the Catholic Church probably looked to the average person. The Catholic Church was all about punishment and retribution and people judging you. And what Protestants offered was the idea that faith alone saves you from hell. That's it, faith alone. Doesn't matter whether you were baptized, doesn't matter whether you had original sin. It doesn't matter where faith in Christ alone saves you. And so what you see here is you see the Holy Spirit, you see the blood coming out of Christ. Here is the Holy Spirit again coming down here, and you're bathed in the blood of Christ. Faith in Christ alone is all that it is needed. You are bathed in the blood of salvation. That is what the line from Luther is. And so what you see is you have Christ here on the cross, and he bought your salvation. But back here you see an empty cross, and we're trying to focus on this resurrection. Here we go. Here's Christ coming out of the tomb, and he's standing on the devil. He has beat the devil. And so you really are looking at what at the time felt like very different religions. This is about punishment. This is about grace. This is about how many laws there are, rules to follow. And this is about the grace of God. And at the time, 1530, Protestantism was a much more forgiving and kind religion because of the corruption in the Catholic Church. And so this is what Cranach is showing here. He is showing that all you need is God's grace. All you need is the belief in God, and you don't have to worry about buying your way into heaven. You just have to believe. Don't let them scare you. And that's the lesson that's here. And what ends up happening, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I'm going to talk about it very briefly right now, but what ends up happening is so many people convert to Protestant religions because they're afraid of the punishment of the Catholic Church, and they are so welcomed by the grace. I mean, that's law and grace, by the grace of Protestantism, that it actually does cause what we call the Catholic Reformation. What we see happening there is that the Catholic Church does see the error of its ways, and the Catholic Church undergoes a massive, massive change to how they're doing things, because so many people left, and they faced the corruption in the Catholic Church, and they work towards fixing things. All right. This is our last piece of the Northern Renaissance, called Hunters in the Snow by Peter Bruegel. That's how you say that, Peter Bruegel the Elder. You might even call him Pieter Bruegel the Elder. Again, we have oil on wood here, 1565. So we're well and truly, into the Protestant Reformation by this point. What's interesting is this is just one of a set of 6 images that he created to be a series of man's activities during the months of the year. So this is November and December, okay? And when we talk about Northern Renaissance, this is one of the things where I really can talk about the Northern Renaissance imagery separate from religion. The only other one we did that was separate from religion was Arnolfini. But look at how high the horizon line is here. This is a really good way of identifying a Northern Renaissance painting from an Italian Renaissance painting. Northern Renaissance has very, very high horizon lines. Italian Renaissance paintings usually keep your horizon line about halfway. Okay. So that very high horizon line is there. These are peasants. These are regular people. This is average day. We talked about that early on when I first introduced Northern Renaissance, is that a lot of the Northern Renaissance images are about genre scenes, about day-to-day life, about just simply living. And so that's, a really important thing that happens here. In this image is that we see that these are people living real, honest to goodness lives, as opposed to, rich people and people in the court and royalty and stuff like that. We see people making candles. We see men who have gone hunting with their hunting dogs. We see people skating and children playing. We see women working, and I'm going to zoom in on some of these because it's very hard to see. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at average people. We're also going to see that they don't really have, in this particular image, and in a lot of what Bruegel paints in this particular series, is very, very detailed pieces with lots and lots of things to look at. But the majority of the faces are not particularly clear, not because he couldn't create it, but because he wanted these to feel more universal. They are just men. You will see that the dogs are entirely very thin. And you will also see that the one man seems to be carrying a single rabbit. But other than that, there doesn't appear to be anything. So they're coming back from their hunt, and we see that their hunt has been unsuccessful. Okay. We also see that this image has lots of implied lines. Okay. We have the line that comes down here. We have the line that comes down the edge of the cliff. Okay, that brings our eye this way. Then we come down here to this, and our eye comes back up here. And then we see here, and then our eye. So this is a really excellent composition that keeps the eye moving. Okay, Northern Renaissance paintings, Arnolfini, this one, Isenheim, Law and Grace, they tell a story. They're not just a single moment. There's usually a whole story involved. Northern Renaissance paintings give the viewer lots of things to look at, lots of details, lots of things to discover. The foreground, the part closest to you, is usually very sharp, and the background is usually a little more hazy to give you that concept of perspective. And so here we see work and play. We see successful work in the soap and candles that are being made. We see unsuccessful work in the hunt. And let's look at some of what is going on in the background. All right, so we'll zoom in. Here they are making their candles and soap. Okay, here they are walking. One woman pulling the other, gathering twigs. There are birds. Here's a man with a bird in the tree. Now let me back up and show you. Look, that's a woman, and here's her skirt, and she has a thing that they were pulling. They were probably pulling some kind of materials that needed to be moved from one place to the other. But now that they've moved the materials, the other one's just going to ride on it. But look at, that's this down here, okay? It's so detailed that you can't even tell with this from far away that that's even a person. But there's a man right there. And there are those women. And here are some stairs. And here's some birds. And they're almost impossible to see, okay? Then we're going to zoom in. I mean, look at the little bird's nest, bird box, I mean. Then we're going to zoom in, and we're going to see all the people playing, early hockey, ice skates, curling, children gathered together and ice skating and holding on to each other. There's a whole town back here. Here's that bird in the tree, but there's a church right there. So let's go back and see. Okay, here's our people playing hockey, our people playing hurling. Here's our bird in the tree. There's our church in the background. I mean, this is an incredibly detailed work of art. Again, Northern Renaissance, using that oil, figuring out the slower drying times, able to put those details in, and able to use the layers of oil paint to give luminosity and to be able to point out these very small, specific things to look at. All right, so that is the end of the Northern Renaissance. And when I see you next time, we will be discussing the Italian Renaissance. And how the Renaissance looks in Italy is very different from how it looked in the North. So I will see you next time when we do Italian Renaissance. Bye, guys.